Hello, all you weirdos. Jim here, and welcome back to the Weird Science Comics YouTube channel where we have breaking news. It's not really breaking because I think most people will know this, but we'll end up talking about it, discussing it. We'll see if we like it or not, but it is Spider-Man news, and it is this headline straight from the press release from Marvel Comics. Amazing Spider-Man begins a new era with Joe Kelly, Pepe Larraz, and John Romita Jr. And before we get into the press release, which will probably trumpet this is the best thing ever, we'll talk a little bit about it. Joe Kelly right now is on The Amazing Spider-Man doing the 8 Deaths of Spider-Man. Him and Justina Ireland are kind of doing it together. It kind of lessens this announcement in my mind. The idea that most people were going with was that this 8 Deaths of Spider-Man was a little bit of a breather time where Nicko and the Spidey office that don't seem to do anything right, they're going to go and look for a new writer. And boy, wouldn't anybody want to write Spider-Man. But the thing when you get here is, oh, by the way, it's just going to be Joe Kelly. The first thing that I think most people would think is, oh man, like they couldn't find anybody. They couldn't find anybody else because, again, this seemed like a little stopgap till we get the big thing. And I said to people, the 8 Deaths of Spider-Man was not the start of the big thing because they always end up going with the number one, which they will in April. But just having Joe Kelly, whether you like him or not, we'll get into that in a minute, but whether you like him or not, it just feels like a bit of a letdown overall because it's like, hey, it's just going to be him who's already on the book. Now, going into the idea, if you like Joe Kelly, all the power to you. I liked Joe Kelly at points in the past, but recently things like Nonstop Spider-Man, things like Savage Spider-Man, things like Deadpool Wolverine WW3, that was unreadable. It really was. It was so bad. But the Nonstop Spider-Man and the Savage Spider-Man were pretty bad as well. And if you disagree, that's fine. But boy, I didn't think that those were good at all. And then you get to what is going on now, the 8 Deaths of Spider-Man. And it's not great. It's not great at all. It's really convoluted. It's a bit of a mess is what it is. And Joe Kelly kind of comes in with this Deadpool energy that he has. And it seems to be a little bit over the top for me. Again, some people have argued with me on the channel about that fact. I know that Peter's quippy and all that, but it doesn't feel like Peter. Plus you get sad sack Peter. You get kind of jerky Peter. But again, I don't think that most people are thinking this 8 Deaths of Spider-Man is very good. People have even suggested to me that they might like Zeb Wells better. Like you have this setup where you're replacing Zeb Wells. How can it go wrong? I mean, this is the dream job of replacing a guy who's looked at as having one of the worst runs of Spider-Man in quite some time. And you haven't even been good enough, even if you like the story. It's not good enough to say, oh, my God, this is what I've been waiting for. Oh, my God, this is so much better. And now having him on the main book, it's just a letdown overall. Now, some names are being bandied about at points, and they're not better than Joe Kelly. So that might be a positive. Justina Ireland was one of the bigger ones, and it seemed like that made sense, that she was on this 8 Deaths of Spider-Man. Maybe get used to the character, maybe even getting a couple tips from Joe Kelly, and then off she goes. But that is not happening. Another big thing I heard from a bunch of people was it was going to be Lansing and Kelly, and that would have been a disaster. Not even just their writing, that is like minus hype if they're on it. Now, they do call themselves the Hive Mind, but when you give yourself nicknames, that's really lame and embarrassing, and that's what it seems they did. But here is now the press release. Well, I think they're going to be a little more positive than me when this goes on. And again, if you like Joe Kelly, it's fine. It just, this whole thing feels like just, oh, that's it. Like we already got that and it's not doing great. So it just is an overall just kind of a wind out of your sails kind of announcement. But here we go. Marvel Comics history is made this April. Marvel Comics history with the launch of a new volume of its most iconic title, Amazing Spider-Man. Doesn't seem like they're treating it like that, right? It just doesn't seem to me. And the sales, what little sales numbers we can see, it seems to be trending down. Announced exclusively earlier today on Polygon. This was from yesterday, I believe. And boy, fancy Polygon. The next era of the beloved series will be brought to you by celebrated Amazing Spider-Man and Deadpool scribe Joe Kelly, legendary Amazing Spider-Man artist John Romita Jr., and one of the industry's most acclaimed contemporary artists, Pepe Larraz. fresh off his exemplary work on Blood Hunt and X-Men. Now, John Romita Jr., I know a lot of people have been, kind of ragging on him lately. His art isn't as good as it was, but I don't mind him being on The Amazing Spider-Man. I kind of think it's neat when he does, and sometimes it looks better than others. So I can go with that. But as the kids say, we should give him his flowers, right? We'll give him his flowers as we go. Pepe Larraz is kind of mid to me, and I'm not even saying his art. It's just the idea that I don't really seek out a Pepe Larraz book. And somebody said, hey, Pepe's on this. I'm like, Pepe Le Pew? But when you end up going, he doesn't bother me. I don't hate his art, but it's nothing that I'm, gravitated towards to buy just because he's on it. So that's fine. Joe Kelly, we already talked about. We'll continue. The new Amazing Spider-Man will deliver classic Spidey storytelling. That's cool. With bold new horizons. For Spider-Man, his supporting cast, including the recently redeemed Norman Osborn and Peter's new girlfriend, Shay. So you kind of mentioned two things that a lot of fans aren't really down with as much. The redeemed Norman Osborn and, Shay's fine. She's just there. She's like Pepe Larraz. They're like, Peter's new girlfriend. I'm like, Pepe Le Pew? And they're like, no, Shay. Oh, Shay. Yes. But she's okay. She's a little sassy. She gives it a little to Peter. She's no MJ. I'll tell you that. But, MJ's with Paul, which I think they're hinting at in the next sentence. And the greatest supervillains in all of pop culture. That has to be Paul, right? That'd be funny. If I was writing this whole press release, I would have in parentheses, and no, we're not talking about Paul, but maybe we are. Just kind of fun with it. But it continues. The new run finds Peter without a job. Sad sack Peter. It's weird, too, in the whole deal of Zeb Wells' run. You had him working with Norman at Oscorp. Norman wanted Peter there to make sure he wasn't turning into the Goblin. He still did. And then Peter did. And then he did. Then Peter did. It was like ping pong. But in the meantime, Norman ends up saying, hey, listen, I'm kind of sick of seeing your face around here. You don't have to show up. And if you don't show up, I'll pay you triple. And then it almost felt like, and if you really don't show up, I'll quadruple it. And really what that meant was that everything was already being taken care of in the lab because, of course, Kamala Khan was working in the lab. And we all know she's a big scientist. But it was weird. Like the idea of having Peter sad sack looking for job, no money. Yes, that's classic. But, maybe we're kind of tired of that. So it was kind of a neat little play where Norman's like, just you'll have a job kind of on the books, but you don't have to show up. You go do your Spidey stuff. And I actually thought it was a good way to just kind of avoid that nonsense. But we're back to the nonsense, and that is classic. I mean, everybody who would argue with me would say it's classic deal, but it usually leads to the other classic, sad sack Peter, which then reminds us that he has not progressed much. And then we see Paul and we get angry. So all that is not the greatest, but he's looking for a job, looking for gainful employment. Maybe he should do like an OnlyFans. That'd be pretty cool. But his job search is interrupted by a rampaging rhino who is but the tip of a sinister iceberg. And that's not in like quotes or, sinister something. And it's just their deal. What major supervillain is working behind the scenes, weaponizing other spider villains, including one we haven't seen in, get this, over 7 years. We have not seen this villain. They have it all in bold as if this is like, we haven't seen this villain in 40 years. 7 years, huh? Ay. Also, what is that goblin-free Norman Osborn up to these days? Now, if you go by the 8 Deaths of Spider-Man, which we probably should because it's Joe Kelly, especially the issue it was in, Sad Sack Norman was just going to sell Oscorp. I think that what he's doing is counting his money is what he's doing. But in the meantime, he was having pizza with Peter. And it was weird because they had that weird back and forth in the Zeb Wells run, especially by the end where suddenly that cushy job of not showing up became a not thing to lead into this. That seemed to be one of the things Zeb Wells was kind of like course correcting at the very end to hand it off to Joe Kelly. Now we're going to get some quotes, which, as you know, they're always the best. Even though this is a new number one, I don't think of it as a restart per se, Kelly explained to Polygon. And I think what he's saying is, I'm already on the book. That's not what he's saying. He says, I'm writing the next chapter of the story as one of the world's greatest characters, lucky enough to follow in the footsteps of the folks before me. That is kind of a weird deal to say. It's like, hey, it's a new number one, but it's not a restart. Well, they don't really restart, but it's a new number one. Well, why make it difficult? Like this is why his writing is so convoluted a lot of times, I think, because when he talks, I don't know what he's saying. He says, I feel a drive to take a bold, unexpected swings in order to see how Spider-Man deals with Marvel-sized curveballs. Now, that's what scares me. I said it earlier. Don't have the drive to go too bold or unexpected. That's when we get that WW3 book. It was unexpected. I don't even know if it was. I don't know what happened in that book. To this day, I'm still wondering what the hell I read. It's like lodged in my brain like a spike. Pressure makes diamonds, he says, just for random science fact. I guess he's right. Pressure does make diamonds. Thank you. So there you go. I didn't think that we could get Joe for a substantial run of Amazing Spider-Man. Spider editor Nicko added, in between awful tweets, digging in the fans. He's always so busy with animation and television and movies. I'd love it if he was saying, like, he's always just watching stuff. He's like, this guy can't get away from the television. Oh, my God, get the devices away from him. So he usually just dips in and out of comics. I tell you, even the way that Nicko is the worst hype man ever. The idea is like, yeah, the guy's usually busy and kind of like shows up occasionally, but oh my God, we get him this time. He had a tweet actually, because every Wednesday he'll tweet his favorite book. And amazingly enough, Amazing Spider-Man's always his favorite book when it comes out, but it doesn't feel like he's doing it as a joke. Like, that is funny to me that the editor says the book that he's editing is the greatest, but he tries to be funny in them. And one of the last ones, and I actually ended up, commenting on it on Twitter. I ended up talking to him a bit, but the idea, he said, listen, this next, and actually it was Zeb Wells' run. It was when you ended up, I believe it was when you ended up having all that action packed stuff that he claimed was the craziest things you'd ever see in comics. But his tweet was, you better not be driving heavy machinery when you read this issue. But the thing is, that's the caution deal. That is the warning for something that makes you drowsy. And that's what he said about the book. Like, he can't even do that right. Oh, he's such a schmuck. I'm going to keep this kid friendly. I always get yelled at. There's always some people like, why didn't you just read the news? Why did you have to make your comments? I don't know. But I like doing it. But he says, hey, we thought we couldn't get him. He was always busy doing that animation and television, dips in and out. So he says that's why we tapped him for the 8 Deaths of Spider-Man. Now, I get all these hype things, but this is the deal. How can you say this with a straight face? He was doing so great. So when he asked if we'd consider him for being the ongoing writer, I felt like I won the lottery. Now, if you're going to do that, let's kind of dissect that. So he's saying the 8 Deaths of Spider-Man is so great. I don't even think that's what he's saying. I think that what he's saying is Joe Kelly, he's been on Spider-Man before, but he listens to what I tell him. It is pretty easy to work with because that's all it seems. And I will mention that a lot of people, when we had the end of Zeb Wells' run, and we didn't know yet that Joe Kelly, Justine Ireland were doing the 8 Deaths of Spider-Man, a lot of people said, it doesn't matter. It matters a little. I'll even hit the sound effect. It doesn't matter because Nicko is still the editor, and this is still the case. And I agree with them fully. I've come to agree with them even more now that we saw this 8 Deaths of Spider-Man. But when he says, hey, we were looking for Joe Kelly just then said to them, hey, I can write Spider-Man. I don't think that this is something that out of the blue, he just kind of like, hey, is there any way that I could stick around? I think that what was happening is they're having problems finding somebody that they consider good enough, a name enough to write Spider-Man. And that's sad. That is sad. And when we get to the end of this, I will ask everybody, well, are you excited about Joe Kelly staying on? Who else might you want on the book? And really, a lot of people will be like, want to react to, oh man, I'll tell. And then you're going to scratch your head going, I don't know who the hell that I'd have on Spider-Man, and make it somebody who is, viable that they could get. One of the names could be like a Jeremy Adams, but he's kind of down with DC right now, and there's a bunch of new books, but I wouldn't have mind seeing what he could do. But again, he should be a bigger name, but he's not a bigger name yet. But that would certainly catapult it. But I'm getting ahead of myself because we still have more quotes here, because he says, hey, Joe Kelly was doing great. And then he said, hey, I hear you bitching and moaning that nobody wants to write Spider-Man. What the hell? I'll do it. I mean, it's the greatest story of inspiration to get everybody fired up. It basically is, we were sitting around and Joe Kelly was already doing 8 Deaths of Spider-Man. Obviously, we weren't doing anything ourselves. And he said, hey, by the way, I might want to write it. Okay. All right. And he says, what? I felt like I won the lottery. He says, maybe he could buy a personality if he did. But he says, add Pepe Larraz's masterful and supersonic talent. Supersonic talent for art. Odd. To the equation. Oh, my God, he's doing math. And we knew we had the makings of an instant classic, which anytime somebody says that they have the makings of an instant classic, what you usually don't get is an instant classic. That's kind of a, big talk there. Then John Romita Jr. agreed to stay on. Fireworks went off. I'd love a video where he's the only one out in the parking lot. He's setting off fireworks. And then like a bottle rocket goes where it shouldn't. And then he starts yelling. But then he just goes into the building and he's fine with it. I better go buy some lottery tickets, he says. What a hype man. But yeah, there you go. We ended up doing a little too much nonsense here. But I hope that you had some fun. And really, I want to know who you would like on the book. And if you want Joe Kelly, that's fine. The play here would be something like saying, hey, Joe Kelly is under, Nicko's thumb for this 8 Deaths of Spider-Man. But once he starts his main, it's still going to be the same. It's still Nicko editing it. And I think that there's a lot of things that people would want from, the Amazing Spider-Man. They're never going to get with Nicko there. And that will just continue on. I mean, if Nicko really, really wanted a writer to be looked at as the greatest thing ever, he would just, maybe his buddy gets the book and he says, listen, just get MJ and Peter together. It doesn't matter how shitty the issues would be. People would go nuts and they'd love it. But that's not going to happen. And it seems like Nicko wants to shove Paul at us at every step of the way and things like that, just because he thinks it's funny to make fun of the people who pay his salary and make fun of the people who keep Spider-Man up in the upper echelons of sales, even when it is terrible. People will continue. And I keep saying it in every video that I do, even reviews for Amazing Spider-Man, that it is one of the biggest travesties of comics. The idea that the Spider-Man fans seem to be, to me, some of the most loyal, dedicated fans out there. And yet Marvel does not congratulate them. Instead, they take advantage of them. They take advantage that you're going to buy anything. But again, Joe Kelly isn't somebody that right off the bat I would say, oh, man, that's just a kick in the teeth. I'm not going to read it. I'm just worried because of a lot of the things that he's done recently, in my mind, have not been good at all, bordering on terrible and unreadable. But, maybe this will be his, shining way back. Maybe he'll really wow me and everybody else, but I'll be reviewing the books on our Marvel podcast and also here on the YouTube channel. So look out for those. And by the way, check out all the links in the show notes or video description. I do so many podcasts and things. I get things messed up in my mind, but check all those out. And yeah, check out the channel, subscribe if you haven't. And with all that, I will talk to you all later.
You are all weirdos.
Weird science is the revolution. Weird science is the revolution.